Naomi. Let's give her another round of applause. So we are on a soul trek this year in 2014. We are boldly going where no soul has gone before, exploring inner worlds. And so far what we have discovered about this soul trek is that we need courage and a willingness to change. And sometimes making a change only means changing one small habit or replacing it. And we also discovered on our trek that we need a map. And we need tools for the trek, just as if we were going to travel somewhere with our backpack and our shoes and whatever. We also need spiritual tools for a soul trek. And so in Unity, we use our 5 Unity principles. Before I go to that, though, we also, and what we talked about last week was the collective field. That's the collective consciousness that we all dwell in. Could we have the house lights back on? I don't know where our ushers are, but if you could turn the lights on, that would be great. So we collectively create a creative field, and a creative field can be positive or negative. Here at Seattle Unity, we create a collective field through worship. So we come together and we are uplifted in song. We are uplifted in prayer. We are uplifted in the message. We are uplifted because we come together and we know the truth together. We know and call forth the goodness in the universe. There are also creative fields that are not so positive. There are creative fields of negativity and anger and hostility. And I think we had firsthand experience to the feeling of a creative field last week with the Seahawks in the Super Bowl, yeah? I mean, the 12th man. We had this incredible energy, and we had a wonderful Super Bowl party in the library. I want to thank Dana and Nancy for hosting that for us, because it was amazing. But even if you're not a football fan, it was hard not to be affected by the creative field, but by the energy that was generated and the excitement that was generated by the Super Bowl, right? But the Seahawks, it was like, yeah, and it was so much fun to root for them, and especially for me, I was able to root for a winning team. It was like amazing. And we had this great celebration this week with the parade. And, you know, there were some mornings I woke up and I just felt happy. And I was like, and it was picking up the feeling of the city, you know, picking up the feeling of Seattle and how great it was to be in that, again, the creative field. So we look at these tools that we use for a soul trek, and in the 5 Unity principles, they're basically, as we all know them, there's one presence and one power in the universe, and it's God the good. God is omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. There is nowhere we can be where God is not, and we call it good. We call forth the good, and we don't believe in a separate power of evil that is trying to make us do things, but rather we are one with the creative energy, with the powerful energy and love of the universe. Our second teaching is our second teaching is the Spirit of God indwells all beings. Now that proposes 2 things. One, that we have unlimited and incredible potential because we have the God seed within us. And 2, we should treat each other with kindness because we are relating to, we are honoring the God, the goddess in one another. We are seeing that. We are calling that out. When I lived in the ashram, it was always the guest is God. Treat the guest as if they're God. So what if we treated each other as if we were God with skin on, goddesses with skin on? And it is who we are. Our third teaching is the law of mind action. The thoughts that we hold in mind produce after their kind. We become co-creators of the creative field. And we do this through the practice of prayer and meditation, and then we bring it out into the world because it's not enough to just talk about it and know about it. We have to live it. So what is interesting is that Unity and the New Thought teachings are becoming more and more mainstream. Unity was founded about 120 years ago, as was the New Thought movement. And it was kind of a different message back then. But the truth is, this message is hitting the mainstream. I know sometimes when I watch the evangelicals on TV, they're saying the same message, you know, about being positive, about prosperity, about all these wonderful things. And the spiritual principles are being used by the Seahawks, by the NFL. Now, how much more mainstream can you get than that? And only in Seattle, right? The Seahawks, what? So, Coach Carroll said that I wanted to find out if we went to the NFL and really took care of guys, really cared about each and every individual, what would happen? Well, the Super Bowl happened. That's what happened. So they practice mindfulness, they practice meditation, and they practice yoga as part of their training. So the yoga helps them not only to be flexible, but yoga helps them to focus and to have concentration and to be in the present moment. Russell Wilson said this: "We talk about being in the moment and increasing chaos throughout practice. So when I go into the game, everything is relaxed." So Russell Wilson, being in the moment. The offensive tackle, Russell Okung, said, meditation is, listen to this, meditation is as important as lifting weights and being out there on the field for practice. It's about quieting your mind and getting into certain states where everything outside of you doesn't matter in that moment. There are so many things telling you that you can't do something, but you take those thoughts captive, you take power over them, and you change them. Spoken like an offensive tackle. So that's amazing, isn't it? That a football player is talking about mindfulness, about meditation, and he's talking about the law of mind action. He's talking about unity principles, about new thought principles, but I just love the way he says it because it's so football-y that you take those thoughts captive, and then you take power over them, and then you change them, you know? It's like, yeah. And you wrestle those thoughts to the ground. And with a slight twist, these could be the words of Charles Fillmore 120 years ago if he was a football player. The truth is that there is a divine plan that is at work in our lives and in the world. And we are a part of this divine plan. We have a part to play in this divine plan. Seattle Unity has a part to play in this divine plan. I believe that we are living in changing times and revolutionary times, and our spiritual master teachers were visionaries and they were revolutionaries. Jesus changed how the people at that time perceived God, because at that point, other than, we're not talking about the goddess religions, we're talking about Judaism and Jehovah, that the Old Testament God was, you never knew what he was going to do. You know, he was very temperamental and he could strike you down at any moment. And what Jesus did is he referred to God as Abba, or Daddy. So he introduced a personal relationship with God. And of course, he was accused of committing blasphemy over this, but he introduced a personal relationship with God. He also talked about the kingdom of heaven is within you. In other words, it's an expanding consciousness, and it's in the midst of us, and it's not something that's in the outer world. And so he opened the door for us to begin to look within. Buddha was a visionary and a revolutionary. When he was Siddhartha, he had all the riches that he needed, and he left his family and headed out to seek enlightenment, didn't he? And we have our humans, our ordinary humans, who are revolutionaries and visionaries in the form of Charles Fillmore, in the form of Martin Luther King, in Nelson Mandela. And maybe you know some, the list is long, and Gene Roddenberry can be seen in that way as well. So we're in this experiment right now. We're in this divine plan that is unfolding, and we each have our part to play in the seeds to plant, because we don't know when those seeds are going to come to fruition. Just as the seeds right now are in the earth, yeah? They're there. We don't see them. They're covered with snow. The trees look dead, but they're ready to burst. And so we have those seeds, those thought seeds that are ready to just pop and it can happen quickly. So 50 years ago today, the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan in February 9th, 1964, and in front of 75 million people. There is a 2-hour Grammy special on tonight as a tribute to the Beatles with Paul and Ringo performing, and it's going to start at the same time that the show started with Ed Sullivan 50 years ago. Tom Hanks said that hearing the Beatles that day was like hearing the future. And I remember when, I was 10 when the Beatles came to America, and I didn't want to like them because everybody liked them. My brother liked them, all my friends liked them, everybody was talking about them, so I refused to watch them that first night that they were on Ed Sullivan. I don't know what I was doing. And the next Sunday, I was at a dinner with my parents, and they were only adults at this dinner. There was no other kids. I was bored out of my mind. There was nothing to do. And luckily, the hostess took pity on me, and she said, "So, would you like to maybe watch the Beatles?" And I wanted to say, I really don't like the Beatles, but I didn't have anything else to do, so I said, sure. And she set up a little TV off on the side, and she turned it on. And I'll never forget seeing them. I felt like I literally got pulled into the TV, that I just got sucked right into the television, and it was never the same again after that. It was an amazing experience. Now, the country and the world were still in shock, and we're still grieving from the Kennedy assassination that happened in November. So November 22nd, Kennedy gets shot, and it's like we go into this winter that just feels like it's never going to end, and it's like, what's happening with the world? There's nothing good here. What are we doing? And then all of a sudden, unexpectedly, these 4 young men show up with this incredible, exciting energy. I mean, we can take the energy of the Super Bowl and magnify it by 1,000,000. That's what it was like. It was that powerful. And the thing is, we as the country and the world were in such shock, we weren't expecting anything good. We weren't expecting something great after coming off this bleak and depressing winter. And it was the beginning of the British invasion. And the British invasion changed the world. And it's just some of the bands that came during that period are Jerry and the Pacemakers, Herman's Hermits, the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, the Who, the Hollies, the Animals. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And one of the things that they did is they took the music, so the seeds for this British invasion were planted in the United States. And they were planted in our roots and in our music. And what they did is they took particularly the black music and they gave it back to us. It's like they took it, they mixed it up in the Long Tall Sally, Roll Over Beethoven, and they brought it back to us. And what they did is they took music that was not mainstream and it became mainstream. And not only did it become mainstream, but it got all mixed up, like all the music started to blend together, and so that it came out to be something different than what it had been before. And it happened so fast. It exposed Chuck Berry and Little Richard to a wider world. The Rolling Stones spent most of their time, a lot of time in Chicago with blues artists and bringing the blues into, again, mainstream. So we can look at the changes that happened musically. Those are easy to trace. But there were so many other changes. There was a fiction book called The Liverpool Fantasy. And it's a story about what would happen if the Beatles never got together. So it's kind of a personal story, like Ringo opens a beauty salon, George becomes a priest, Paul becomes like a Vegas singer, and John is John. He's just doing what he does. So the story is about them and what happens because they never became the Beatles. But in the backdrop, there's all this weird stuff happening, like there's a curfew, and there's all these things that are happening in the world, and it isn't until almost the end of the book where I go, oh, wait a minute. The world didn't change because the Beatles never happened. And so there's this whole changing world that was also a part of this experience. There's a new book out called How the Beatles Rocked the Kremlin, the untold story of a noisy, revolution. A Russian Beatle fan said that the Cold War was won by the West, not by nuclear weapons, not by nuclear missiles, but by the Beatles. The author, Woodhead, says that the Beatles were totally illegal, and it made that forbidden fruit even sweeter. The kids thought that the Kremlin told us that this is evil music, but it's not true, it's lovely music, and maybe they've been lying to us about other things as well, and that had a very corrosive impact. It said that many Russians learned to speak English because they would listen to the lyrics and they would write them down so that they could sing them. And when asked why the Beatles, why not the Who, why not the Rolling Stones, and they said because the Russians are a very melodic people and they like some of the melodies and they like some of the, they like that kind of sound, that it appealed to them. So the truth is that the Berlin Wall did not come down till 1989, but the seeds for the Berlin Wall to come down were planted with that British invasion. It was planted from 64 to 68. There were many seeds that were planted in the 60s, and there are many seeds that are being planted right now. Mindfulness is being practiced by an NFL football team. Those seeds were planted in New Thought. Those seeds were planted in the 70s with the TM movement. And I want to just look back for a moment and see some of the seeds of change that were planted in the 60s that we see have changed us. And this is from a PBS documentary called 2013. And that is, well, we had the moon landing, of course. The Mississippi Freedom Summer saw civil rights workers murdered and hundreds of white students going back to their campuses in the fall radicalized. America began to hear of Malcolm X. Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali. One of my favorites here is the TV viewers were spellbound by an immensely strong, totally independent woman on the season's biggest new hit, Bewitched. Now here's this TV show about a witch, and she says, I'm going to give up my powers, but then she never really does. She's just great. So there's all these, Johnson declared war on poverty, and he pushed the Civil Rights Act through Congress, but he also got a blank check for the Vietnam War at the same time. So we see these seeds that are starting to grow, some of them good, some not so good. Ira Chernus said this about changes. Change itself remains unexpected, invisible, even unimaginable to most people at the time. And as the huge leap from 64 to 68 teaches us, we should never forget how surprisingly fast it can happen. Seeds of change are being planted all around us all the time. Some grow underground, unseen for a long time before they come to fruition. But history can teach us how to watch more closely and optimistically for signs of change that might be coming surprisingly soon. So in current events, here are some of the issues that are up, some of the seeds that are being planted. Pope Francis is moving the Catholic Church in more liberal directions, especially for economic justice. There's a lot of discussion about the inequality between wealth, the rich and the poor. Iran and the US signed a preliminary agreement to settle their differences through diplomacy. Colorado and Washington legalized marijuana. A majority of Americans for the first time approved of gay marriage. And all those things happened fast, didn't they? And The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, is one of the most popular movies with teenagers right now, showing them expressing and opposing what is. So which of these seeds will grow? We don't know. But our role, if you will, is to nurture those seeds. Just as we see the seeds that are in the ground right now, we can't see them, but they're ready to burst. So are these seeds of change that are within us and all around us. These seeds are also ready to burst. We're having an annual meeting today, and the annual meeting is to talk about where is Seattle Unity in the next 50, 60 years? Does this building reflect who we are? What are the seeds of change that we need to start planting for that to manifest? There is a divine plan unfolding, and what used to be unusual, like the Unity message, is now mainstream. Mindfulness and meditation are used by the Seahawks. The Beatles were an unexpected, wonderful surprise. They were amazing, and they came after a great tragedy. They changed the creative field. They changed everything, and it changed fast. So we're at this brink again. And how great would it be, with all the crises that we're looking at in life, in our planet, for something amazing, unexpected, and wonderful to show up through us, through the collective, through the creative field, through the divine plan. So, seeds of change.